Today in Azerbaijan, Ferrari have put together what has to be one of the better opening days of the 2025 season, with both Lewis Hamilton and Ferrari overall looking extremely comfortable around the street circuit in Baku. Lewis Hamilton topped the second practice session just over a tenth of a second ahead of his teammate Charles Leclerc. And not only were they quick across the one lap, but there is an interesting situation starting to unravel throughout that session, and it is revolving the tyre compound choices that the teams will make in qualifying Saturday. A little bit more on that later. Away from Ferrari, a lot of other driver and team combinations were struggling around the streets of Baku, most notably and surprisingly the McLaren duo, with both Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri having major slides during FP2, with Lando Norris having a major moment breaking the rear left suspension of his MCL39, thus not able to set a quick lap time as well as missing out on long runs. So potentially quite a important point of the weekend missed for Norris in his pursuit of the World Championship, which is already incredibly difficult. Now, back to Ferrari, a very interesting and a very positive day for them without a shadow of a doubt, where essentially Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc from the get-go looked much more comfortable in FP2 over that of FP1. The contrast between the handling between the two sessions seems like it was night and day, particularly in terms of FP1 where they looked like they were driving on ice. Now, to go back to the thing I mentioned at the beginning of this video, with the interest in tyre compounds. Now, this is when it gets really interesting in determining what set of compounds they actually set their laps in Q2 and Q3 once they make it safely through to those sessions. Because on the first runs in the qualifying sim in FP2, Hamilton was incidentally actually 2 tenths quicker than Charles Leclerc on his soft tyre run. And when it came to the second and final quali sim in FP2, both drivers were of course on the soft compound tyre. Charles Leclerc found 4 tenths of a second, while Lewis Hamilton only found 2. So that tells you two things. The first point is the medium tyre is without doubt quicker than that of the soft tyre, and you have the evidence of the improvement Leclerc and Hamilton found from set 1 to set 2. And then second of all, the actual evolution of the circuit of itself was not necessarily as big a jump as we've seen in past weekends around Azerbaijan. And I think this sets up some very interesting strategies that have to be played out, particularly going into qualifying as well as FP3. They're more than likely not going to be running many sets of mediums tomorrow morning before they actually go for qualifying. And I expect to see Ferrari and probably Mercedes, because they're very good and very well detail orientated when it comes to these sorts of things. So I think those two teams, and probably Red Bull, now that we're talking about it, will come into qualifying with at minimum 2 new sets of medium tyres to be run in Q2 and Q3. So look out for that tomorrow. Now, as regards to race pace, that is the very important issue here. And it's of course all dependent on the setup strategies the teams and the drivers individually choose to go down. You can have 2 differing strategies at play. What happened in FP2, for example, Lewis Hamilton ran the more loaded rear ring than that of Charles Leclerc. And as you can see, he was very much quicker than him in the twisty medium high speed corners in sector 2. But of course, when it comes to race situations and the DRS train that inevitably is going to be at play in the race, it is going to be important that if you go that route, you actually open up a 1 second gap to be able to get out of the DRS detection zone, because they're going to be sitting ducks come the back straight when DRS is activated. So there are many variables and choices teams still have to make in FP3 before heading into Parc Fermé for qualifying. And I think depending on what they find in terms of their tyre deg, depending on FP2, teams might revert and change their strategies. For example, Ferrari with Hamilton might go to a less loaded rear ring just to be able to have more straight line speed in that final sector to combat the DRS train they're probably going to be in at some point in the race. You don't want to get stuck behind slower cars because they can overtake you with their DRS. Now for the long runs themselves, this is quite an interesting thing to see. Of course, minus Lando Norris because of his crash, we do have the sims from not only George Russell, Lewis Hamilton, Charles Leclerc and Oscar Piastri to look through. But surprisingly, even given such a small sample size across the field, not just Ferrari themselves had what looks to be arguably the best race pace out of the bunch, which is quite surprising. Even the likes of Russell and Antonelli, they were lapping in that race simulation nearly 0.8 and 0.9 of a second behind that of Leclerc and Hamilton equally. And it's the same sort of situation but to a smaller degree in terms of Piastri, Verstappen and Tsunoda, where they're around 0.5 second to 0.7 of a second behind. Now I don't know whether this is to do with fuel levels or they didn't get their tyres into the right working window during their runs, but this is very unusual to see. And whether this actually plays out in the race come Sunday, only time will tell. But still, very interesting and encouraging signs for Ferrari. And particularly with Hamilton once again on the mediums being equally as quick as Leclerc. Positive things for him personally too. But it's going to be, I think, an exciting qualifying session. And I think we've not seen the best yet from Max Verstappen and the Red Bull outfit. I think as we see every weekend that we go to a racetrack, Fridays can be awful. But come Saturday in qualifying in Q3, Max delivers the goods and they're in the ballpark for podium contention, if not race victory. So I expect to see the likes of Leclerc, Hamilton, Norris, Piastri, Russell and Verstappen vying for the top 6 positions come Sunday's race. Another outlier I would look out for is certainly the Williams Racing unit. I think they're going to be at the back end of the top 10 along potentially with Haas. They seem to go quite well today. And Aston Martin are set for a disastrous weekend with the high drag levels on their AMR 25. So don't expect anything from them. I think when we get to Singapore, they will be back in the ballpark for having a fantastic race result. Anyway guys, so in conclusion, wrapping this video up, Ferrari look mightily quick from Friday's practice, but as usual there may be a slow regression with all the other teams in terms of power usage and the fuel that they had on board getting closer and overtaking them come qualifying Saturday. But I think we're in for a fascinating weekend based off of the evidence in FP2 we have seen today. Enjoy the weekend and I will see you across it. See you soon.